Hello everybody, my name is Hue. Today I read the Battle of Antietam on the September 17, 1862. The bloodiest battle of the Civil War was fought. More lives were lost on this day than on any other day in the history of the country. The North and the South were fighting over possessions of the Miller Farm cornfield. General Robert E. Lee was the leader of the Confederate Army. He had his men positioned along the banks of the country lane. The general for the Union Army was George B. McClellan. This general has a scout that has gotten a copy of the Confederate Army's plan. It was very helpful for the Union. Bullets rained down on the Confederate soldiers. The Union soldiers broke through the line and killed thousands. The country lane where the Confederates were hiding became known as Bloody Lane because of all the people who died there. More than 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in this battle. But the Confederate Army was not finished. It would go on to fight another bloody battle with the Union Army known as the Battle of Gettysburg. Story questions. 1. Which statement best explains the reason for the Battle of Antietam? D. Where in the passage does it explain the advantage that the Union soldiers had at this battle? The second paragraph, maybe. Which of the following statement is false about the Battle of Antietam? D. What is oh, what's the other opinion of the battle at Antietam? Thanksgiving. Each year, on the fourth Thursday in November, many Americans gather around the tables with their families to eat a large feast. Do you know why that is so? It is a celebration of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving started back with the Pilgrims. The year was 1621. The Pilgrims had survived a very difficult winter. The next fall, they had a great harvest. They were so grateful that they decided to have a feast to celebrate. They invited 91 Native Americans to join them. The pilgrims and guests gathered around a large table to eat. There were games, races, and other activities. The celebration lasted on 3 days. We don't know if they really did have turkey, but they did have some kind of birds, as well as venison, meat from deer. They didn't have pumpkin pie because there wasn't enough flour for that. They did have pumpkin that has been boiled and softened. They also have berries, fruit, nuts, and fish. It wasn't until 1777 that all 30 colonies celebrated Thanksgiving. A lady named Sarah Hill wrote articles in magazines about how important it was to celebrate Thanksgiving. Finally, in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving to be celebrated on the fourth Thursday in November. In 1941, Thanksgiving became an official national holiday. Thanksgiving has been celebrated ever since. How does the author feel about Thanksgiving? Amused. Which statement explain the purpose of Thanksgiving? The third paragraph informs the reader about War of 1812. Some people say that the War of 1812 was the Second Revolutionary War. In a way, it was. This war was a fight between America and Great Britain. They disagreed about shipping and trade on the seas. Fighting took place in both Canada and America. The Americans won the War of 1812. Thomas Jefferson was president in America at the time. He was trying to keep American goods going to other parts of the world. He didn't, however, want to get America involved in world events. France and Britain were at war at the time. They both thought that America was supplying the other country with goods and weapons. Both France and Britain judged the American ships. They were treated poorly. America was mad at both countries, but ended up fighting Britain. The White House and the Capitol were both burned in the war. A treaty was finally signed. As a result of the war, America became known as a powerful player in the world. Story questions. A good title for this reading passage would be C. A similarity between the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 is in the last paragraph. What does the word player mean? Based on the information in the passage, what caused the War of 1812? A time of reform. The early 19th were a time of reform in the United States. There were many great things about the country, but there was some problem as well. A group of people who wanted to make changes during this time were called progressive. Many of the city and state governments were corrupt and dishonest. The progressive wanted to change their leaders. Theodore Roosevelt, who was the vice president at the time, was one of the leaders of this reform. He worked with others to change the type of people that were elected to office. They were successful. Led by new leaders, many cities were able to pass new laws that make life better. These cities built schools, parks, and playgrounds. They also built better housing for families. State governments also work for a change. They passed laws that make large companies pay their fair share of taxes. They put limits on the amount of money they could charge customers for things. With these new changes, the quality of life continued to improve for people. Theodore Roosevelt eventually became President of the United States upon the assistance of President William McKinley. He continued to work for changes improvements. Story question. Based on the passage, what were some of the problems in the country during the early 19th? What conclusion can be drawn by the people that wanted reform? Changes for women. You may be surprised to learn that it took until the 1920s for women in the United States to have the right to vote. Voting wasn't the only change for women during this time. By 19,000, by 1900s, women had made a lot of progress. More and more young women were graduating from high school. More young women were also going to college. In most states, women were beginning to be allowed to own property and keep the money they earned at their jobs. Before then, only a husband could do these things. Anything the wife earned belongs to her husband. More and more women began working outside the home. Most of the jobs available were separated into men's jobs and women's jobs. Most women worked as teachers, nurses, librarians, securities, factory workers, and telephone operators. Men were the only one allowed to be doctors, lawyer, banker, police officer, and mail carrier. Sweeping changes were still needed. Women continued to fight for the rights to work at whatever profession they wanted. Women demanded in the same pay that men got. These changes were difficult to make happen. It took many more years. In fact, women today are still working for some of these same things.